Hey guys, so in my last video, I created an example cart, and I wanted to kind of showcase how you could translate something like this into a Remix application. If you're not familiar with what Remix is a server-side framework uh, that uses React. Um, and a lot of web standards to facilitate the business logic in a typical application. Um, so if you haven't heard of Remix, I would encourage you to pause the video and maybe take a quick look at it. I'm not going to do a big overview. This video is going to be more about just what it might look like to translate a uh, normal web application or like a vanilla JavaScript application to a Remix app. So just to give kind of like a brief overview of the code from the last video, we've got a lot of HTML here, and this HTML is basically the same representation of what you're seeing here on this page. So here you got subtotal, taxes total, grand total, and all of that's down here. Got the add to cart buttons with quantity and the name. And then down here, we've got a cart controller, a products controller, and a checkout controller. The checkout controller, again, is like the top level controller that houses all the data and business logic for the application. And then the cart and products controller house the business logic for dealing with the cart and the products. So yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time getting into these. I feel like I did a pretty decent job explaining them in the last video, so if you want to understand more about that, you can go ahead and watch that. So yeah, so now here in the Remix application, I actually wrote it in TypeScript. If you're not familiar with TypeScript, I think that'll be okay. It's not going to be too much of a transition here. So yeah, at the top of a Remix application, we have a routes folder, and that routes folder is going to map to all of the different routes that exist in the application. You'll notice that we have these underscores here, and the underscore just tells Remix, hey, don't render this as a top level route. So like when we're talking about underscore products index, here this is actually going to be the top level route, where if we go to slash in the router, we're going to go to that page. The underscore products just signals that this is kind of like a container for the logic. So when underscore products dot underscore index gets rendered, this underscore products gets rendered because this is a convention in Remix, and this is what is considered a layout. So in this layout, we have a loader and we have a route, and there's a couple of other things here, and I'll explain what those do. So the first thing, let's go to top to bottom. So this route is calling use matches, and use matches is a hook for dealing with templating. So you can ask matches like what route has been rendered, and that's exactly what we're doing here. So I've created a function here called isProductsCartRoute, and this is just going to check to see that the match ID is of underscore routes slash underscore products dot cart. So routes slash underscore products dot cart is going to, that is this template here. And so if this gets rendered, then this function is going to return a Boolean of true, right? Because we're just saying like, hey, out of all of these matches, does one of them contain this match with this ID? And that effectively is saying to us that this route has been rendered. So another thing here, we've got this thing called products message, and in the products message, we're getting, or this is effectively Remix's way to communicate data. So like if you're getting data, if you're updating data, if you're mutating data, you can do that in Remix. If you're asking for data, that's where a loader comes in. And if you're like changing data, that's where an action comes in. So in this case, we're using a loader because we're asking for the data. And so here we've got this list products function. And so the way that the list products function works is we basically just return this object with a type that says list products and a payload of products. This could be really anything that you want, but for demonstration purposes, we're going to be using the server-side data. So in terms of adding, removing, or updating products, it's all just going to be in memory. And then we have our cart data, and again, this is all just in-memory data. And so now we've got this nice sort of abstraction between like how data changes are happening and how we can go about communicating those different actions in our application. So in this scenario, we have this action where we want to list products, and the action type is going to be of list products. And then we have a payload which is going to be the actual products themselves. This might look familiar if you've done React before, specifically with Redux. In Redux, this type payload signature is pretty common. It's something that I typically like to use because when you're dealing with multiple messages, it's quite nice because then you can just say like, hey, if the type is add item to cart, or if the type is list products, do this or that. So yeah, this is typically how I like to group my logic. So yeah, so we have our cart. Let's see here. We were on the products page. We were here. We have our products, sorry. And so now we're listing the products. The products get back here, and effectively this is the only message that comes back. So we can just blindly assume that products is going to exist. And then we map over those products and render them as this product item. So the product item takes in a product, and the product item contains a form with the input with a name, a quantity, and the add to cart button. But you'll notice here that I've got this button here with a name of intent and a value of add to cart. That's to help signal to Remix what kind of action we're trying to take for this particular form. And we're submitting it to this /cart action. So just to visualize this really quickly, if I click on this add cart, each one of these is the product item. If I click on add to cart, it's going to add the item to the cart, and you're going to see it show up in that cart. Now, I didn't explain any of this just yet, but to sort of help solidify the idea of what's going on here, if we click add to cart, if you notice, the route actually changes. So if I click add to cart, route changes. And if I click anywhere in this darkened area, you'll notice that the route changes again. So one of the reasons why this is happening, or the reason why it was coded this way, is so that you can actually turn off JavaScript entirely. All right, so yeah, JavaScript's off. And now if I click add to cart, you can see that cart still works. So I can delete these, add them to cart, I can close this, I can add more to cart, close more, add to cart, close, whatever. So effectively, like, this website still works without any JavaScript. And that's one thing that's really, really cool about Remix. So the reason why it was coded this way is because we're actually trying to make it work without needing JavaScript enabled. So here everything is backed by a form, and that form drives the decision or the behavior to the server, and the server determines what actions need to be taken. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at this cart action. So the way that we can look at that is under this products.cart folder. This is effectively going to be just like the underscore products.index, but this allows us to sort of structure our components around routes. So if you notice here, I've got this item row, a route, and that just sort of allows me to clean up components around the different sort of use case for a route, right? So like for this particular cart, I don't need to see this item row implementation if I'm just looking at the route. So if I go here, you can see this is our default function that gets rendered, our route, right? And we can loop over the route and then render the cart item row. But the nice thing about this folder structure is I can actually extract that item row out into its own template, but not have it be existing in the same file, which some people might find a little bit more helpful in terms of reading. So let's just explore this for a bit. We've got the products message and a cart message. So the way the products message works, this is something similar to use loader data, except we're using use route loader data. And if you notice here, we're passing in this string. The string represents the route of which the loader exists. So here under route/products, what's actually happening here is the loader that exists in here, we're going to have access to, because this products file is acting as a layout, and so we're going to have access to this when we're rendering the products cart. And so we can access that data through use route loader data. And so we don't actually need to refetch this data, which allows us to save time communicating back and forth between the server, because we've already got this data on the client somewhere, or on the server somewhere. Again, Remix is kind of like an isomorphic framework, so you can do certain things between client and server pretty transparently, and this is one of those things, which is pretty sweet. All right, so we've got a list of products from the previous products layout, and we also have our cart. So the cart is now using the loader data from this routes loader, and this is just going to call get cart. Get cart is literally just going to return the cart that exists in this file. So typically you'd store the stuff in the database or something somewhere, but for demonstration purposes, this is fine. And refactoring this should be pretty straightforward because effectively we've got everything wrapped around these async functions, which indicate that it will be an asynchronous piece of work. So now that that's explained, we can start talking a little bit more about the template. So we have our cart item row, which might be interesting. We have a grand total, and then if you notice here, we've got this price formatter, and that's being used between the subtotal, the taxes total, and the grand total. Cool. So let's go ahead and dig into the cart item row. For each row in the cart, let's go ahead and pull this up. So right now there's nothing in the cart. If we hit add a couple times, you can see here, let's just do this one more time. There we go. All right, so we've got a couple of items here. You can see there's a price, there's a tax, and a total. This is basically going to be what exists here. And so here we can calculate the subtotal, the tax total, and the grand total for each cart item. So the subtotal is going to be the amount, or sorry, I guess this is actually going to be something more like price. This is going to be tax, and then this is going to be total. Sorry. So price is going to be the price and the number of quantity. So here if I delete that, and then we, instead of say 1, let's say 3. And so now here you can see the quantity is 3, and the price, tax, and total have been adjusted accordingly based off of the quantity. Actually looks like there might be a bug here with the subtotal, but we can address that in a second. So another thing here is we've got this form here, and we're communicating back to this cart. And in that cart, we're sending the name, the quantity, and the intent. And so here we're saying the intent for this action is going to be for removing the cart, or removing the item from the cart. So if we go back to the cart route, we can see there's this thing called an action, and the action is going to allow us to communicate data changes, right? So now here we've got name, quantity, and intent, and we're parsing the quantity from a string to an integer. And in the scenario that the parsing fails, we default it to a 0. So here we've got some checks here to say, okay, if name isn't a string, quantity is less than 0, or intent also isn't a string, then we want to return an error. And then in the scenario of, actually we want a default here where we return JSON null. There we go. So for the add to cart action, we just call add item to cart, and effectively that's going to encapsulate the logic necessary for adding these items to cart. And then, yeah, we're also communicating the subtotal, the tax total, and the grand total. I think actually, let's see here, so $3.99, if we refresh and say, okay, so I think there is a issue. So one of the things about Remix is during development on the server, it will recompile the assets of the server, and sometimes that stuff will get out of sync. And so in some scenarios where you actually need this stuff to be stable, you can create singletons. There's documentation in the Remix docs for how to do that. So let's do like remix singleton. Well, I know it exists in Epic Stack. So Epic Stack is a project created by Kent C. Dodds, one of the developers on Remix. And in here, I know that there's a utility, maybe app utils. Let's do like miscellaneous maybe. No, it's called singleton. Of course it is, because that's what makes sense. Cool. So here there's basically just, it's a little bit of a hack, but here there's an explanation. Since the dev server requires the bundle, do some shenanigans to make certain things persist across that. And so in the scenario where you're seeing these kinds of like desync issues, you can use something like this singleton pattern to make sure that those desyncs don't happen during development. Again, this is a development only issue. So when you're deploying to production, you should not see these issues. It's just the fact that like the development server is constantly recompiling. All right, so now that that's explained, we don't have actual logic issues in this code. There's just desync issues. I'm not going to worry about that too much. We're going to get back to here. So with our intent, we can add items to cart, we can remove from cart, and the remove from cart looks pretty much the same as the rest. Except obviously we're removing the items instead of adding the items. Cool. So let's see here. Let's go back to products. We have that is products cart route, and one of the things that's kind of interesting is we're actually using this component called transition. Transition is a component that is made by the guys from Tailwind. This is a separate package called Headless UI, and inside of Headless UI, transition allows us to create nice animations that work seamlessly across the client and server. So here we go. So we've got a transition. We specify our root transition and use the show property. The show property determines whether or not the animation should kick off or not. So if it's true, it kicks off these enter animations, and if it's false, it kicks off the leave animations. So in the scenario where we enter, we start with a opacity from 0 and increase it by 100%. And that's going to give us our dark gray background. And then here we've got another transition, and this is going to be the background of the modal. And I believe I talked a lot about this in, I believe, my first video. So I'm not going to spend too much more time explaining about this. But yeah, so now we've got the ability to add stuff to the cart, we've got the ability to remove items from the cart, and this is kind of the switch between how you would go about building a fully object-oriented vanilla JavaScript application and transition it to something that's more that's using something like React. So yeah, hopefully this was pretty interesting for you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to get into some of the details here. But yeah, if you like my content, feel free to subscribe or like, whatever. If you have any questions, let me know. See ya.